Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 6, Episode 20 of our weekly Q&A, which has become the P&Q&C&A&T. And as always, right off the top, we're just going to real quick give a rundown of what the letters stand for and try to make it not exactly the same as every time so the people who actually listen to this on a regular basis don't get annoyed.
Yeah.
P is for a couple
PPP.
things.
It's for PPP.
Yeah, it's for podcast. That's the main thing. Link in the description for ways to listen to this on the major podcasting apps if you are on the video currently. And if you're on the podcast app, then you're already there. We also have Patreon and patrons with our P, which is the reason why we're able to move this to this format, which is basically the ad revenue that we lose out based off of putting it up in other forms, and the extra time to put it up, as little as that may be, is worth it because there are people supporting it, and more importantly, there are people who are supporting it who are patrons, enjoy listening to it in podcast form.
Yeah, they wanted it like that.
Yeah.
They actually requested it.
Yeah, so that's a preferred listening style for some people, including people who are supporting us directly financially. We have Q for questions, which is how this started. Q&A, pretty standard. We had C, because sometimes people weren't asking a question. They had a comment, but we wanted to talk about it anyways. So A is the corresponding answer to the question. And then T is for anything that isn't an answer. So for talking, because sometimes we just ramble. Sometimes we get a question, we don't answer the question. So we decided to expand and add C and T, so it basically encompassed all forms of user input and output by us, and then we added the P because of the expansion of platforms.
Right.
Anyways, this episode is probably going to be a little quicker. I guess you'll know from where we end up. But we don't have as many questions this week, so this is a great opportunity to say, hey, if you have any questions, injustice related or not, you can go ahead and ask those in the comment section of any of our videos, as long as they are a separate comment and not a reply to somebody else. They're pretty easy to
And
get
it's
at.
not that it's just any question, right? Because some questions lend themselves to a little bit more thought.
Yeah.
And some questions are really just like a quickie comment and response.
Which we are going to get into a little bit, I think, later here.
Yeah,
We've got some
that's
examples. But yeah, so if you got a question, if you've got something you want to ask us or something that you want us to talk about, you can go ahead and let us know. Our first question comes from Vislo, or I don't know exactly how it's pronounced. It's Visloh. And they say, BDCKR, not relevant to this video / podcast, but do you think NetherRealm will add the other 5 evil Batmen? Namely, the Drowned, and then in brackets Aquaman, the Murder Machine, in brackets Cyborg, the Devastator, Doomsday / Superman, the Dawnbreaker, Green Lantern, and the Red Death, the Flash. And if you see this, or if you care, do you think they'll be metal?
Yeah, I think it's not a bad guess.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we've had one update with a bunch of metals. And I'm hoping that there's still life in this game yet.
Yeah.
And it feels like if they're gonna be doing it, they haven't done enough of an experiment with this idea of creating a new tier of characters that are inaccessible for most people unless you're willing to put in a lot of time or a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, if they add the new characters in, they almost definitely will be metal, because that's sort of the point, right? They're sort of the archetype for metal characters, right? And they added some, and they started adding other people that were just metal tier that weren't actually from that, like, story. Right? But when they're talking about the other 5 evil Batmen, they're talking about that, like, dark universe. I forget. I literally have, like, a comic book that has all their origin stories that my friend got me.
Right. And you're more hip on that than I am right now.
I mean, I'm not really, but just in that respect. So, with all their origin stories, and it's basically just Batmen from different dark universes that have each stolen or done something to acquire the powers of one of the other superheroes, or supervillains, or just one of the other characters from that universe, and then they're all coming and wreaking havoc. So those would be the other metal characters to complete the set, because we already have which ones do we already have? Which metals?
We have Ares, so that's the Merciless, and the Batman Who Laughs, who's the Joker.
Yeah. So we have those two, and so that would be completing the set. So I think they would have to be metal if they were introduced.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that, and I think it's really because they've only just done one round.
Yeah.
And if they're gonna listen, if I'm hopeful that there's going to be another update, and that seems
gold characters.
Well, of anything, but
Yes.
I think it's just way more likely it's going to be metal than anything else.
Yeah.
And they probably have to do at least a few updates with reskins before they'll decide if it's worth going back to any golds, like creating any golds, because they never had any silver challenge characters, right?
Never. No.
So it's unlikely that they're going to go back, and I'm a little bit sad for that. I mean, because all these medals for sure are reskins, but it means that we're unlikely to get new characters, and we're unlikely to get characters that are going to be that we'll be able to team up with the guys we've already got.
Yeah.
Because it's no problem. You can still use them if you get them, like one copy of the medals now.
Yeah.
You can still put them with other medals, but to team them with other golds that have the really good passes to make it interesting.
Probably not happening. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know if they'll be introduced. If they do, I know the tier. And honestly, it is interesting because you would have thought they would have continued to, but they did do updates with like Shazam, right?
Yes.
And metal characters that aren't actually like metal characters like story wise, lore wise.
Right.
So they've set not a full precedent at this point. So it's hard to say for sure, I guess, is the long and short of it. So that's sort of
that was the main question, really, which is kind of funny, because we're a little. Some weeks we have lots of Qs. This week we don't, but we're gonna have a lot of. We're gonna proportionally have a bit of T. Because here's the thing, like I said earlier, there's not a lot of questions this week. At least stuff that lends itself to this kind of format. So here's an example of one. We never figured out how this person pronounced their name. It's either Laterino, Craperino, or Laterino, Craperino. Because I'm thinking that the CRAP with a single P is still crap.
Yeah.
And they say, does the damage boost stack with the Cloak of Destiny? And they're referring to the Necron's Scythe video. Mm-hmm. And the short answer, the answer in totality is yes, it does. Mm-hmm. And I just tested it right now. I was using Luchador Bane, did the special one with the tag and stun. When he only had Cloak of Destiny and Tantu Totem, he was doing somewhere over 200,000 damage when it crit. Yeah. And he was doing over 300,000 when I just added the Scythe to it.
Yeah.
So that's one of those questions. Answer in the comments, you get to the point, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. And it's not worth sort of answering the podcast, or not worth it. It's just, this would be a very different sort of video if we just answered quick questions like that, right?
Yeah.
Sort of more rapid fire. Yeah. But I think what we can spend the rest of our time here, and however long that turns out to be, is talking about maybe some stuff that's going on just in terms of media.
Yeah, and also the Raptors game is on tonight, which I'm hoping to get to. It's going to start while we're just doing this podcast.
Yeah, and ES has taken to commenting on the Raptors game in the comments, which is always sort of fun to see.
This one's critical, but all right. So there was a Game of Thrones season finale, which was a big deal for a lot of people, and I haven't seen all the seasons yet. I've actually just started on season 1 and almost through season 1. Mm-hmm. Really feels true to the book, the feeling of it.
Yeah.
And to not only just the events, but just the characterizations. And it reminds me, it's been a few years since I read Game of Thrones, but it reminds me of exactly how I felt when I was reading it. Those moments of, oh my god.
So that's pretty good, because you loved Game of Thrones.
I loved it. That was great.
Yeah. But there's lots of complaints. There's mixed sort of feelings about the new season, right?
I don't even know that it's mixed. There's very few people who liked it. Who like the season finale, and lots of people who have complaints, and I'm not really that scared of spoilers. I'm going into this knowing pretty much exactly what happens through the first, I believe, 6 seasons.
Yeah.
And some of the guesses, or some of the things that I know have happened that haven't happened in the books yet, were confirmed as being very plausible potential plot twist that they were leading towards. So there's not a lot that's new, I think. And what I think the problem is that when the showrunners were working with the book material, it's so much richer. Mm-hmm. So they know. Oh, I read something interesting. So the TV show guys are closer to plot writers, where they know they have to get from one point to the next.
Yeah. And
George R. Martin is more of a pantser. And they call this pantsing, where you drop characters in, you know who the characters are, you drop them in by the seat of their pants, and then you see where they go. We don't want to answer that call. Alright, we got rid of that. So you drop them in my seat of pants and just see where they end up.
Yeah.
And so they're different approaches. And when you've got sort of a collaboration where you're doing both, I think it's stronger for that.
Probably. I think that's fair to say.
And so now the showrunners are working with, I guess, plot outlines.
Yeah.
Where you're missing completely all that kind of...
like richness
complexity.
To pick from.
Right.
Where instead of picking and choosing sort of what you include and what you don't include, you're picking and choosing what to fill in from sort of not quite whole cloth, but from a rough outline.
Yeah, and you just have to get them there. So if you're not so inclined, all you do is really just have people go from one place to another. And one of the strengths, I think, of George R. R. Martin's writing was always that he could get inside the head of characters that sometimes seemed completely awful and unsympathetic, and make you care about them and see things from their point of view and understand where they're coming from. So it's kind of sad, and I think this is actually the perfect example of where people who are in a rush to get their media to continue series.
I know the quote that you're going to use.
What, the George R. R. Martin's not your bitch?
Oh no, I thought you were gonna say.
You're only ever late once,
but it sucks forever.
Yes, that's the other quote too. No, because people.
That was not the quote that I was expecting you to use.
No, because it was Neil Gaiman who said that. Where I think it was a few years ago when people were complaining George R. R. Martin was taking too long to come out with The Winds of Winter.
Yeah.
Well, that's the last one. I can't remember what the order is anymore, but it was after Dance of Dragons. People were complaining that it was taking forever, and I think he's stuck because George R. R. Martin knows the characters, but he knows where he needs to end up, but he's still having trouble figuring out what their motivations are to get them to each of the spots, right?
Yeah.
And so Neil Gaiman was saying, the writers don't owe you anything. They owe you the books that they've written.
Yeah.
And if there's more, like I can think of a couple examples. Like Pat Rothfuss is working on the third book of the Kingkiller Chronicles.
Yeah, and that might be out one day.
It might, but you know what? I'm totally willing to wait for it. So it's not finished, but I mean the books so far have been totally worth it and beautiful. I mean, think about it like this. All right, have you remember Stuart Little?
Yes.
By E.B. White. And I don't know if there was ever an intended kind of sequel to it, but all right, so for Stuart Little's The Mouse, and when you were little, you loved that movie and the book.
I remember vaguely.
All right, so but the problem is, when I first read it when I was little, I thought, well, the story's not over. Where's the rest of it? Is it missing some pages? Is this like a misprint? And I felt like kind of left hanging.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's not every story is meant to give you closure.
Oh, that was something, a series of unfortunate events. I was actually looking that up recently, because I just finished watching the Netflix series. And the books didn't give you great closure. And there was apparently like a 5 or 6 year gap after, because he ended up writing a book called The End. But there was a 5 or 6 year gap where I think he had probably intended Daniel Handler, aka Lemony Snicket, that's his pen name, but his pen name is also like a character. Is the entire point, is that his Lemony Snicket is like sort of a pseudo character in the books.
Ah, okay.
But how like the ending was totally unsatisfying, and there was a huge gap in between the like an ending that people had to sit with for like 5 years and another ending of the book, and there were still things that weren't solved in it, and there was a lot of theories about them, and some of the more common theories were actually confirmed about aspects of the end in the TV show. The show actually added onto it, and so
that's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and so like that was like some common theories were confirmed, but the thing that I saw was actually saying that it was sort of betraying a little bit of what the books were about, and you know, Daniel Handler was an executive producer on the show, and I think it was like he might have also written the screenplay or whatever for it. I'm not 100% sure, but anyways, he had a hand in it, right? So it seems likely that this is actually the intended sort of,
or maybe he changed his mind. I mean, at the point where he's writing the book, it was a different time in his life, and he might have decided at some point when he was doing the show.
But there, what I'm saying is that there was enough setup that it seems like it's definitely possible, at least, that Daniel Handler had intended this information to be what it was from the very beginning. But the article that I was reading was saying something about like how it in a way, like, it showed you that not all stories have satisfying endings, and the sort of framing of a series of unfortunate events was always like, oh, don't read this. It's bad, right? Bad things happen. It's sad. You don't come to a satisfying conclusion. And so the book that he left off on for 5 years when there was no satisfying conclusion and everything was crappy felt like an earned ending for what the series was setting up for, and the tone that the series had taken. And the not giving you all your information also seemed sort of like consistent with it. And so, I think that's another interesting example of adaptation, though I think the Netflix for a series of unfortunate events, I also felt in a lot of ways it matched the tone very well, from what I remember. Obviously, I read it when I was much younger, but it matched the tone of the series, and I can't tell if the series got worse as it went on, or if it was really good as a show to binge, and in the time in between the first and second seasons when I was waiting, I lost interest a little bit and lost the plot thread just enough, and then that happened again in between the second and third season, so I can't tell if I would love it equally all the way through if I binged it, or what exactly happened. I know I liked the first episodes and the initial time that I spent with it the most, but I can't tell if that's actually a comment on quality or not.
Right. I can give you another example of something where that's been adapted to television, but I also I'm gonna speak out of my butt because I haven't seen the show. Is the Expanse series, and it started with Leviathan Wakes, and
I haven't seen the show either, so this is going to be a great example.
And you haven't read the last 2 books.
I haven't read the last
Okay, so I'm going to
two
have to be really careful about spoilers. So I just finished the latest in The Expanse. It's Tiamat's Wrath.
Yeah.
And what I... Alright, so this is going to be hard. They do... It's very much like Game of Thrones, where they do different perspectives really well. And you can get into each person's head.
Yeah.
And not only can you completely see why they would think things are going one way and things are going, the world works a certain way, and why, they have an idea, and you can almost feel like that particular story could happen as a separate story and could go in the direction they want and be a very satisfying story. But then it goes somewhere completely different, because once you shift to somebody else's perspective, you see what else is going on.
Yeah.
And I love that. What's really cool is that there's moments of incredible vulnerability and raw emotion without being melodramatic, and they're just these everyday moments where somebody can just say something as, some kid is wondering if somebody was their friend.
Yeah.
And now that, as events unfold, they're thinking that they were just taking advantage of his stuff. And really, all it takes is one person to say to them, yeah, if they said they were your friend, then they were your friend. And again, it's, you know what it's like? It's like Replay, where it's such a trite kind of answer to say, I can't do that. This is my one life now. I'm paraphrasing because it's been years since I read Replay, where I can't do that because this is my one life now. This is how things are. I want to see how this goes.
I don't understand where you're going.
No, just that they're just... Listen, it's true. Like, it's a truism, right? Like, it is. You have this one life. You got to see where it goes. You won't know until you do it. But it's a different perspective because you see...
Oh, you're talking about, like, recontextualizing the mundane.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
And that mundane becomes really, really powerful and meaningful and dramatic without being melodramatic. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
And to me, that's so much more powerful than, those moments where there's a huge war and the king, I don't know, like, these people that have no connection to real people make these big decisions and the world changes. And that's one thing I like about Guy Kay, is because he makes it very much his stories are about people, but they can get swept up in the course of history. Yeah. But that's not where the emotion and the meaning comes from.
Yeah, it's grounded.
Yes.
It's grounded in a really satisfying way.
Yes.
I think that's a lot of narratives, and a lot of, like, creators will talk about that when people are like, oh, like, how did you tackle something so big? And it's like, oh, well, it's really a story about people, right? And I think that's sort of a little cliched, but I think it's also very true, right? Where, like,
well, for the stuff we like. I mean, not all stories are like that.
Yeah.
All right, so
you know what a story that's not a story about people is? 1984, and I don't think it was a very good book. I don't know if I've shared this opinion before on the podcast.
We've talked about this. I agree with you.
Have we shared it personally, or have we shared it on the podcast?
I don't remember. It's been a while.
Okay, well, I'll give the Cliff Notes version of my opinion anyways, which is that it was a story that has a lot of... It's relevant now. There's a lot of interesting predictions that have come true to varying extents.
Yes.
There is... It continues to be a book that is worth talking about, especially for its, like, major terms, right? So, like, the idea of calling something Orwellian has connotations, right?
Right.
Like, the idea of...
And it's not Animal Farm Orwellian. It's always 1984 Orwellian.
Exactly. And the idea of groupthink, right? And doublespeak and all this stuff, right? Is they're useful terminology, and I think that is the vast majority of what you get out of the book, is what you will absorb via cultural osmosis and not from reading the book.
Right.
Because I think the book is an interesting study of a world where stuff happens.
Yes.
And the character is not that interesting, and it's not about
not
him,
that important. It could be anybody else.
His plot is supposed to be, I don't, spoilers for 1984, I guess. The entire point...
All right, what's there's like an expiry date for spoilers,
If you haven't read 1984, skip ahead like 2 minutes, I guess. But anyways, 1984, right? The entire point is that he's built up as sort of, like, rebelling, right?
Yes.
And you don't know... He feels maybe a little special in the fact that he is rebelling. Because he's a rebel, and everybody around him seems to not be one.
Right.
And then you get to the end, and it turns out that, nothing he can do matters at all. The government is too powerful, basically, and he's crushed, right? He's crushed like a bug. And so the entire point basically ends up being that their vice grip on the population is so great that even people who are who are trying to fight against it are accounted for and managed in a really specific way, right? So the entire point ends up being that his story doesn't matter, and he doesn't end up doing really anything of significance, right?
Okay. So that's actually the perfect takeoff point, because I was going to mention that next week, Jo Walton's going to be in town doing a signing, and we're going to get to see her again. But she wrote...
1984, but better?
She did a story about fascism.
Yeah.
That was all about the people.
Farthing.
Yeah, well, Farthing was the first book in the series, a trilogy called Small
Change.
Small Change.
Yeah, so I actually have Farthing in my room right now, and I was planning on starting reading it.
Oh, okay, so no spoilers. No
Yeah.
spoilers. But what it does so beautifully isn't, 1984, there's that really dry part in the middle where I think he was quoting a textbook.
Yeah, there's a part in the middle where basically George Orwell takes a step back and says, here's all the interesting stuff about my world that I couldn't include in the story that I've decided to say now. So yeah, it's literally like an excerpt from like a forbidden book about the government.
So what is so great about the Small Change series is it's the context is, it's you're dealing with fascism, but you're dealing with the people, and you're taking a look and seeing how people that seem like you and me can end up complicit in this system that really crushes people.
Yeah.
So it's less about, like, 1984 was like, sorry, I'm getting excited and screaming.
Not screaming.
1984 is like, kind of a thought experiment. You drop a mouse into the situation.
Yeah.
And it has really no sort of context for the people that are there. Like, you don't see who they are except in that moment, right?
And I should say, for the people who thought I was crapping on 1984, I do think it was a story worth telling, and I do think it had interesting parts, right? But I think, and I strongly believe that it would have been much better as a short story or a novella or something. Like, I think George Orwell could have told a tighter, better, more impactful story. Maybe it wouldn't have been as popular, but I'm saying he could have gotten all the same stuff and have it been a better piece of fiction in like 20 pages, 30 pages.
And to be fair, our sensibilities are way different, right? Like, now compared to when it was published in, 1948, 1949?
Yeah.
But the Small Change series was so much better to me. It was enjoyable as a story, even though it was dealing with a lot of really kind of I don't want to say painful, heavy, some heavy ideas, but it's really getting it, you know how sometimes books can, even though they're imaginary characters and it's imaginary situations, give you, because they feel so real, give you insight, because they're grounded, right? Like we were saying,
exactly. Yeah.
Give you insight.
They're stories about people.
Yeah, but they act like real people, not like like robots that just go around and go from one plot point to another, right?
Yeah, it feels fleshed out, and you feel as if they could have made other choices and done other things, and it wouldn't have been the same story, but that they would have, like, that it's feasible that things could have gone a different way.
Right.
Right? That that this is just sort of like one path through life, the same way that anybody has one path through life, and it's not that it was like the only thing for these characters, not what like they were meant for, right? Because people aren't meant for things.
So you haven't even read My Real Children, also by Joe Walton.
I haven't,
and it deals with almost exactly that, like how there's just different paths that people can take.
Yeah,
and how just that moment can go in such divergent directions, but then they still have these areas where they cross back and forth. They intersect a little bit, even though they're just totally different. No, I guess is this going to end up being like a Joe Walton recommendation?
I mean, I would recommend Joe Walton.
Yeah.
As a person.
Yeah.
And for the books, what have I read of Joe Walton's? I don't know if I have read anything.
Oh, you need to fix that.
Maybe. Yeah, I will fix that.
All right. I was going to mention too. All right, so because
I've read her reviews.
Oh, those are great. She's done that. Why this book is great.
Yeah.
What makes this book so great?
Yeah, and she also did a deep reread of Name of the Wind. So I've read content by her and enjoyed it. I don't think I've read any novels or fiction.
Yeah, definitely worth fixing.
Yeah.
I was going to mention earlier because we start off Tiamat's Wrath, and this is going to be my 1984 where I stick in notes of stuff that I'd written down, even though we've gone off from it. So Tiamat, when I saw that, I thought, oh, that's the dragon from Dungeons and Dragons, the cartoon. And then as soon as I thought that, I thought, I recognize, okay, so that means that they were actually a little bit more literate, because I can't imagine that Tiamat was the origin of the name, and somehow the Expanse is borrowing from Dungeons and Dragons to name their story.
The Expanse borrows from stuff, though. They also had Caliban's War.
Right, but that's Shakespeare.
Yeah, but that's
not,
more literary.
Yeah, they're not borrowing from Dungeons and Dragons, the cartoon.
Yeah, probably not.
So it turns out that, all right, so this is from Wikipedia. In the religion of ancient Babylon, Tiamat is a primordial goddess of the salt sea, mating with Abzu, the god of fresh water, to produce younger gods. And she's a symbol of the chaos of primordial creation. She's referred to as a woman.
So who was Kronos' wife? Or Kronos' partner? I don't know if they were married. Because that's sort of the equivalent, right? Giving birth to gods.
I guess so. That's true.
It's a sort of Titan-ish, right?
Yeah.
Not exactly, obviously, because it's a different thing, right? Babylon, if it was Greek and Roman gods, then they would have been basically the same. But this is probably not stolen from one or the other.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's just funny. Like, there's so many. So I guess this is the one thing that makes it harder to. Well, all right, so I get then that there's a lot of elements when I'm reading stories that I'm missing. Mm-hmm. There's like references and allusions and stuff. And what's cool is, so I'm aware that there's stuff going on and these literary allusions and stuff, and it doesn't matter that it's going right over my head, because the story, the Expanse, is just that good.
Oh, you know what an example of that is? So we both have just recently caught up on Jane the Virgin.
Yes.
And I could tell, this is not really a spoiler, they have like telenovelas in Jane the Virgin, right? They have like sort of sub telenovelas because one of the characters is an actor in it. And that happens relatively early on. That's not really a spoiler. I won't say who it is, because that, if you're just starting.
Well, how's that a spoiler?
Well, if you're just starting, you don't know.
Know that they're...
Yeah,
okay, yeah, that's right.
So, but you'll come on to that point, whatever. And so the way that they were talking about it, they were, at one point, they were making references, in a way, and they were telling something in a way that seemed like joke. It was a joke, but I didn't understand. And it was something about telenovelas and talking about changing audiences for them. So doing it for a different audience.
Right.
And so they're talking about doing a telenovela, and they're like, oh, so we'll take the story and whatever, and we'll just rip it straight out of it. We can change a bit if we want or whatever, and we'll call it an homage. And the way that they're talking about it, I'm like, oh, there's an original Jane the Virgin. And there is. There's an original, I think it's Venezuelan telenovela, that's Jane the Virgin. And it's got some of the same character names. One of the parental figures of one character is a love interest name is where they cribbed the name from and stuff. They changed stuff around. It's really weird. The artificial inseminator runs a fashion magazine, and Jane becomes a photographer for the fashion magazine. And the thing that gets thrown off about her life track is that she was going to go into journalism in the U.S. When I looked at the plot synopsis, but there's more than 150 episodes, and I also found out that there's like 6 different reboots of Jane the Virgin in different languages.
What?
There's like a Greek Jane the Virgin. There's the English Jane the Virgin. But if you look up Jane the Virgin original, because I forget what the actual title is,
right?
In Spanish, and I also would mess up the pronunciation anyway, so it wouldn't be that useful for anybody who would be looking it up. But there's been a ton of different reboots at different times.
Okay, so this is like what other the precedence for that kind of reboot is like game shows. I guess like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or Amazing Race.
Yeah. No, but so there's like a crazy. But I could tell by the way that they're delivering the line that it was supposed to be a reference, right? And so I was able to like look it up right after. But also I told that to a friend who's also watching Jane the Virgin, and they had no clue that there was an original version, and I don't think you picked up either from
I did not,
because they were telling it, and I'm like, oh, okay, and then I paused and I googled, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, right? But it's the same kind of thing where it doesn't matter if you don't get it. But I'd imagine for anybody who's watched both versions, that was like a really fun sort of nod, right?
Right. No, and it's kind of runs parallel to the idea that the really good kind of media or content or story or whatever, it's got enough to it that it bears, so that if you watch it, there's a good chance that you're going to get more out of it. And whether you get more out of it because it reveals itself to you, or you get more out of it because as you get older, you just learn more things and you know more.
Okay, so the other versions of Jane the Virgin, they had one for India, one for Poland, one for Venezuela, one in the United States, which is Jane the Virgin, one in Greece, and one in Israel.
Oh, that's
so there's
hilarious.
A lot. And it was a Venezuelan telenovela, but I guess they did another one in 2013.
Wow.
So there's 2 Venezuelan Jane the Virgins, and there's an Indian one, a Polish one, U.S. or I guess North American one, because it's for us too, here in Canada, a Greek one, and an Israeli one, which is interesting, right?
That is.
Or I guess it's, yeah, but that's, so they've done a lot of different, because it's an interesting idea. I think it's definitely compelling sort of
it's
concept.
It's fertile soil for storytelling.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So that was just something else where you can sort of tell that they're making references maybe peripherally, but not maybe have the depth to understand them. But if you notice it, you can actually look it up and sort of get the same experience. Not the exact same experience,
right,
but the same experience of being like, oh, that's a reference to something, and I understand that now.
Yeah. No, that is cool.
Yeah.
What else was happening this week that I wanted to mention? I was going through some of my old papers, just cleaning up a bit, and I found a bunch of stuff. And, some of it was more interesting than others, but what... I don't know if I ever told you... I must have told you this before. So when I went to University of Toronto...
Yes.
There's a bunch of colleges, and I never really understood why they
I
had
will
to
tell
divide
you
the
where
colleges.
I'll tell you where this is going. You went to the one that was the cheapest.
Yes.
And it turned out that there was actually services that were useful to you, and one of them was a free tutor for calculus.
Yes. All right, so... Okay, so I've told this story.
Maybe
for the other viewers. Not the other viewers, but to the viewers. So I never understood why they had colleges. And when I went to U of T at St. George campus, so that was downtown Toronto, they had a bunch of campuses that each had their own reputation for stuff.
Yes.
It never made sense to me that you had to pick something, but I did. And so there was St. Michael's, which was Christian.
I think one of the main things that matter is residence. And some colleges have their own classes and clubs, and there's sort of a sense of community.
I guess maybe breaking up into smaller groups.
Well, they have their own clubs, they have their own
But they have them only
classes.
because there's just smaller groups. I mean, if you actually just had one big school, you could just put them all, like they could all have the same
That's true.
clubs and classes, right?
So that's the point of picking. That's not the point of giving you options to pick from.
Right. All right, so there was St. Michael's, there's Trinity College that had the reputation for academics, there's Victoria, I don't know what they were known for. New College was known for being new. And Innis College was known for filmmaking.
Yeah.
And I had no idea about any of the differences. And this is another example of when you're expecting people to make decisions when it's too early for them. and that might have a bearing on like years of their life.
Yeah.
And so my one criteria for picking which college was which had the cheapest student fees.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why it mattered to me because I did pretty well in school, but I found some of the paperwork when I got the admission scholarship to Innis, and that I got.
I can tell you a little fun backstory about Trinity College.
Okay, Trinity College. All right.
Trinity now recently they've had some drama because in past part of the student fees, you could request for parties they would provide you the alcohol.
What?
And there's a little drama because they don't do that anymore, and people are upset at their student fees being reallocated to not buying them booze.
To not booze.
Yeah, so Trinity is a very sort of elite. There's different connotations for each of the sort of places, and the kids that are supposed to be a little more sketchy are the Rotman people. Rotman Commerce.
Okay.
Are just supposed to be a little like separate. Just because it's like business school,
separate
right?
but equal.
And yeah, but Trinity is sort of like the social elite sort of.
Oh, I forgot about the University College too. That was the other one. Okay.
Mm.
All right, so that's kind of ridiculous.
Interesting.
That they would, yeah. All right, so
and they have their own beekeeping club.
Their own beekeeping.
That's another
okay,
fact.
But see, Innis College had a library that not only kept old exam questions, exams from courses that I was able to use, but they also had a math tutor.
Oh.
And math was my best subject. All right,
yeah.
so
sorry, real quick. Another thing that Trinity has is they have a set of like history or whatever. I forget what the term is. They have like an archive.
Okay.
For the history of Trinity College, and they have a professional full-time like archivist. Like that's like a job.
Just to keep track of Trinity College stuff.
Apparently, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's.
So it's one of those things where you've created this kind of maybe artificial grouping and teaming. You know, like the hat for Gryffindor or.
Oh, the Sorting Hat.
Slytherin and all
that.
But and so they've done it, but it's taken root deeply enough that it's created its own kind of
ecosystem.
Yes.
Yeah, and Suits also. Suits is filmed in Toronto, and I know Suits uses Trinity College as a stand-in for I don't remember if it's Harvard or another school, but like some Ivy League school.
Okay.
Trinity is the backdrop stand-in. So my friend sent me a screenshot. You can see Lewis Litt from Suits standing in front of a Trinity College building. That's
because I know that some of the architecture in the buildings are pretty like beautiful.
Yeah.
And
it's very like old school, like university campus.
I'm sure there's an architectural word for it and some sort of thing, but I just know that it looks old and pretty.
Yeah. The only I know some old architectural styles, but I would just be assigning randomly, like, maybe it's Victorian, maybe it's Gothic. I wouldn't.
You'd be making it up.
Yeah, I would just be
using words that you'd heard.
Yeah.
Oh, so, all right, so let me just finish this, because now it made me think of something else. That I needed a math tutor. I was amazing at math. I did really well in all those contests. In fact, I ranked, like, 30th in the grade 13 math contest in the year that it was written. But I was struggling. I thought, I don't understand any of this. I was taking calculus for computer science majors.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what was going on. And I found out there was a tutor at Innis College, and she was great. I ended up getting like a 97, 95 in calculus. And it was not because the material was that hard. It's just that they were really lousy at teaching. And so,
that's a risk that you run.
It is. I mean, there's obviously a lot less structure, and also a lot less guidance and support that you are given. You have to seek it out yourself if you actually want the help.
Yeah.
So speaking of the architect, all right. So back then, there was a summer I spent, and I was actually a janitor at Hart House. Did I ever tell you this?
You mentioned that. Yeah.
Okay. So I spent a lot of time on campus despite not living in residence.
Yeah.
And there's one really sort of funny memory that I have from university that I know it's not the architecture, but I associate it with it because of the way the buildings were made.
Oh, so, I know the story. It's the public urination.
Yes. So there's so the buildings you know how like the modern buildings are very utilitarian.
Yes.
And so they're, you know, squares or rectangles on
Clean.
the outside, and they're clean. Yeah, clean edges and clean.
Modern. They look
right.
They look well maintained.
Right. So in the outside of buildings at U of T, there's like little nooks and crannies.
Yeah.
So they bend. They sort of bend in and bend back out.
Yeah.
And I still remember that one time I was just walking across campus, and I was walking beside this building.
Yes.
And, you know, you don't see somebody until you're right there because of the way the building's
the nooks,
the little nooks.
They've got little places
so
to
as
hide.
I walk past, I realize there's a guy standing in one of those nooks, peeing, facing out.
Yeah.
So
because they're just peeing. You sort of understand. Sometimes people have emergencies.
To go.
Yeah.
You find a nook, and then you just go. He was standing in the corner, peeing out.
Sort of marking his territory.
Sort of.
A little semicircle so that nobody else would take his corner.
Yeah, I just I have some great university memories.
That's good.
And so you just finished your first year.
Yeah.
And so what do you think? What's your overall impression? Because you went to U of T
Scarborough campus.
Yeah, Scarborough
so
campus.
the worst one.
The worst one? All right, so there's Mississauga, St. George, and Scarborough.
I said worst, not worst.
Oh, the worst one?
But I mean, it's not actually bad. I mean, we say that. It's definitely a different speed, and I think it's not necessarily the teachers. It's more, I think there definitely is different sort of intentions and different maybe standards and academic rigor depending on what classes you're in. And there's, you know, there's definitely differences. The content is not much easier or harder, I think, if you're in similar classes. But, you know, people will argue, I guess, and it doesn't really matter.
And I don't think you can ever really know unless you take the same class at different places.
Yeah. I have had some pretty good professors. I've had some pretty crappy professors too already. Yeah. And I think, you know what? If we have enough time, I can tell you about probably my worst professor.
Okay.
So
we're not going to name your professor.
No, I'm not going to name our professor. But I'm just going to say it was a math professor. Because that's broad enough that you can't figure out who it is.
Okay.
And they came in, and one of the first things they said was, "I'm retired." And so they had been asked back from the university, so they didn't understand how to use the online portal. I think we've swapped over in the past few years.
And your school prioritizes that, right? They actually make a big deal about saying this is how we do things.
Yeah, this is how we do things. So we got the syllabus like the first day of class, and he was exactly what you would imagine. You know the idea of like a scattered math professor? Like smart. Well, I don't know how good he was actually at math.
Smart but disorganized.
Smart but disorganized. He was definitely disorganized. I got that from him.
Right.
You know? I'm not 100% sure how competent he was at math. I'm assuming he had some competence, right? But he was the personality-wise, he was exactly what you expect. Sort of disorganized, makes like jokes about math, but not very good ones. They're the ones that you don't laugh at. Where we're talking about like interactions between like objects or whatever, right? And so it's like, you know, to the right sort of mathematician, it's everything's a point. A cow is a point. A car is a point. 2 cars in a collision is just 2 points on a plane, right?
Yeah.
And he probably made that joke in some form. I want to say at least 5 times over the course of the year. And we would go on. There would be a slide, and all it would be is a diagram, and it would be like an example of like it would just be like a label diagram, and we spend 20 minutes talking about that. The next slide would have a bunch of formulas or an example problem, and you would like page through it in like 20 seconds and then move on. So you'd talk for 20 minutes at length about random aspects of you know, math, and then he would skip through the part that we actually had to write stuff down for. Or we were supposed to do like an example problem or whatever, and he would have example questions up on the board. He would put like up on the slides, he would put up an example question, and he would say, "Oh, this isn't a very good one. I won't have one like this on the test." And then he didn't have very many good example questions, it turns out. A lot of his questions, he was like, "Oh, I wouldn't have phrased it that way. Oh, this is a little confusing. It's hard to know for sure." So there was like his example questions were, I want to say, less than useful. So he was a really bad teacher. I didn't learn anything from him. Basically what I did is a lot of it was a review of grade 12.
Right.
And even some like grade 11 stuff.
Right.
So what I ended up doing was I sat there, I listened, and if I understood, it was really easy, and if I didn't understand, I didn't try to learn from him. I just knew I had to look at the textbook.
Right.
And that was basically how I learned, is that I just, like, you know, half paying attention, and if it made sense, fine. If it started to not make sense, I paid full attention, and if it made no sense, then I was like, okay, I need to figure out how to do this separately from him. But the good news about a professor who is retired and doesn't teach you anything and is not, like, you know, is obviously phoning it in at this point. And my TA, I had a TA who I quite liked.
Who was good?
Who would literally be like, oh yeah, I had him for class last year and I knew he was on his way out, and he sort of phoned it in last year too, but he was pretty easy.
Right.
So, you know, the TA also was like, oh, I email him and he doesn't reply to me. And sometimes I email him with like, oh, we need this material, and what he'll do is he'll post an announcement and not reply to my email. So the TA was trying to get in touch with him and would either get ignored or would not get addressed directly, but the professor would just deal with it.
Yeah.
But anyways, the great thing about that is that he would like post practice tests and then not change any of the questions for the real test.
Oh.
Or not change anything. There was like a question that was exactly the same, and what he did was he changed a person throwing a ball straight up into the air to a monkey throwing a coconut straight up into the air, and then he changed the numbers.
Okay.
And there was like questions, like on my final exam, there was questions that were literally ripped straight from the textbook from the practice problems.
Okay, so I will put to you then that can't be the absolute. So all right, so there's different elements, I think, right, to making a good professor.
He was a bad professor. He didn't screw me over.
Right, exactly. All right, so that's where if they're being entertaining, so, you know, fun to listen to.
He was not entertaining.
Being good at sharing information.
Did not have that. Yeah.
Right, but then you get at least a decent mark so that you can get to the next place where you need to go.
I think he did screw people over who did not take the prerequisite classes, because there weren't any technically prerequisite classes for university,
right?
From high school. But if you didn't take the classes in high school, I think you probably were kind of screwed, or it was way more work. Right. You had to do the class by yourself.
Right.
So it was easier for me because it was review, and it was easy review.
So, but then I guess the point I'm making is that the third element that would have made that professor really awful would be giving everybody a hard marker.
Yeah. I remember it was right before the exam. It was past the deadline for our marks for the midterm to be back. He had not given it back, so there was a ton of people who all went back together, and he hadn't posted the marks yet. So when we looked at our test, we got the marks for the long answer, but not for the multiple choice.
Right.
And he said, I'll post it. I don't know if he did before we had written the final. And then we were like, okay, so can we get the answers to the multiple choice questions? And he refused to give them to us because he said something along the lines of like, oh, you can figure it out though. And it's not right because I say it's right. It's right because that's the right answer. And everybody was sitting around going like, okay, yeah, but we're supposed to have gotten our marks back. And we also want to know if we got the right answer or not for the exam, right? We want to know for questions like this, what we're supposed to do. So we had to all pile up. Everybody who came the day before the exam to try to get our midterm back for, you know, like going
it's a
over
learning
again for studying.
experience.
Exactly.
They should be.
Yeah.
That's sort of the point.
Had to pool our resources and figure out which questions we got right or wrong outside his door before the final.
If you don't go over that, then what it means is that you're being evaluated in your final exam for knowledge that you had before the midterm.
Yeah.
Because if you don't use the midterm doesn't actually let you incorporate that information, that's pretty bad.
Yeah. And the other good news though, so he was sort of crotchety in general. He made it very clear his age at many times, and one time he left his mic on during the break, went to the washroom, peed very loudly, and came back, and then somebody told him, and he said, "Oh, I didn't think the mic would pick up that far, so I just left it on." So he knew his mic was on. He just thought that it would cut out. He didn't trust in the range of the technology, and so he sort of just rolled the dice and urinated very loudly.
So this was the exception.
Yeah.
This was sort of like an outlier.
Yeah, but the good news about him being very crotchety is he got upset because he got like audibly annoyed, right? You could tell he was annoyed because he was like, some people like don't write their names properly. It's hard to read on the test. So he was like, so I'm going to give a bonus mark to anybody who writes their name clearly, right? But he made it out to be like, you people obviously don't have the competency to write your name properly, but he did actually assign us bonus marks for it, so I did get points on my physics final for writing my name successfully, which is not bad. You know, that's a nicer way of doing it instead of, you know, because there's just saying, oh, I'm going to dock people marks, right? So yeah, he definitely super phoned it in, but he was part of phoning it in meant that he was willing to basically
let a lot of things go.
Yeah, let a lot of things go. He made things easier because making things harder for us would have been more work on his part.
Right.
It's easier to give people full marks for a question and not have to contest the mark. It's easier not to change stuff from your practice, right? If you have to make a practice for us, it's easier to not change stuff from the practice a lot.
Right.
But so, like, our final exam was crap. It was cobbled together. There was pages on it that had been photocopied and printed and photocopied so many times that you could barely read the diagrams properly. There were things that the numbering scheme kept changing from question to question. It would be like A, B, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And
like Home Alone. It's there's a joke. There's a whole meme about that. It looks like 1, B, C, something like.
Yeah, but so it was consistent within questions. But then there was also like the question numbers. Sometimes would be like obviously like printed in from like whatever source you'd stolen it from too. So it was really crappy for like a university class and for like, you know, somebody like professional, right? But it was thankfully not very difficult.
Right.
Hey, I did not think we would get all the way to the end of this video off of 1.5 questions.
This is the last fight.
Wow.
And it's not going to last very long too. I mean, this is just Batman. He doesn't have anything to protect him. He's done. Like dinner.
Wow. Okay, there we
Great
go.
team. This is the Justice League team that we talk about a lot. But now I think we're going to have a bit more variety in the near future just because as the device starts having trouble not overheating in 7 fights, we're going to switch around a bit.
So there we go. Just to finish up, we have a Patreon. Patreon.com/BDCKR. If you're the kind of person who watches these videos all the way through, you might also be the kind of person who would consider tossing a couple of bucks our way a month if you are in a financial position to do so. And much more importantly, if you like us enough to actually support us in that way.
That's true.
So a huge thank you to the people who do like us enough to support us in that way, as surprising as that is. We have Console Peasant, who is supporting us at the highest last word tier. We have John Auriemma at the Your Message Here tier. We have Shawn, Farrell, Daniel Simonson, and Aaron Mull, who support us on the credited level. And we also have Eddie G, Chris Wolf, and Laszlo Georgiades on the gratitude tier. Thank you so much. And thanks so much to all of you for watching or listening. We'll see you next time. Komoda.